and that's why we question it so seriously.
Berriman believes that the Tasaday were the invention of Manda Elizalde, either for political and economic gain, or perhaps just for glory. The people in the leaf skirts were farmers who never lived in the caves.
There was an intentional deception. There were people, I believe, who manipulated individuals or a group of individuals in the Philippines who were essentially farmers and subsistence farmers, and got them to go into the forest to some caves, dressed in leaves, and play the role of cave people.
Dr. Zeus Salazar of the University of the Philippines was the first to question the authenticity of the Tasaday almost as soon as they appeared in the early 1970s. At the 1988 meeting, Dr. Salazar cited dozens of inconsistencies in the early data.
All of this can be checked by going to the area.
Yeah, at the very outset I suspected that there was something fishy with the story of the Tasaday. For one, I have reasons to believe that their tools are not real tools for the Paleolithic age. The Tasaday tools do not have shapes which, for instance, you would find in these Neolithic tools. You would find the same shape hundreds of times in the archaeological excavations. Specific forms for specific purposes. Whereas the Tasaday tools would be of almost any shape. They just pick them up from the riverbed and tie them up, hafted them, and you had the tool. The hafting itself is quite strange, quite haphazard and rather loose, so that if you shook them with much vigor, the stones would fall off. My suspicion is that they probably saw a lot of Hollywood movies before they set up this hoax.
Not all the experts agree. At the University of Kent in England, archaeologist Ian Glover.
Salazar has a point, of course, that the tool he illustrates and talks about is a very finely made Neolithic adze, such as a piece like this. But of course, in reality, not all the tools used by any community were so beautiful, so finely finished. It's rather like expecting that the sort of furniture and ceramics and glassware in our houses is all like the sort of object you find in the Victoria and Albert Museum. A piece like this, for instance, just looks like a broken pebble. We know it is a stone tool, probably used as a pick for breaking up shellfish on the beach. Similarly, we might find, this is one from Australia, or we might find a piece like this from an early Neolithic site in Sumatra. It would be difficult for someone who wasn't a specialist, and indeed myself, if I found this in a situation other than an archaeological site where we know man was there, building houses, leaving his food remains behind, we'd have some doubt that this really was a stone tool. But I think the context of it persuades us that it is. Our image of hafted stone tools normally fits something more like this. A hafted polished stone adze from Polynesia on a strong hardwood hafting lashed securely, used for canoes and house building. But we do know that various peoples around the world have used stone tools, both polished ones and flaked ones, and hafted them in a way which seems to be very weak and very flimsy. A piece like this, which doesn't look really as if it would be very much use at all. It's a pounding tool, not a cutting one. It comes from, I think, from northeastern India, and one might wonder why they even bothered to haft a piece like this. It perhaps would be more effective just handheld as a pounder. But they found the hafting useful to give a bit of extra leverage to it, and it served its purpose perfectly well. And this is a piece which is rather like those we've seen from the Tasaday. And those tools, it seems, would be quite adequate for crushing nuts, for scraping rattan, and a certain number of tasks like this. They weren't used for very heavy-duty tasks. But from everything that we know about the Tasaday, they were not clearing the forest, building houses, hollowing out canoes, and so on. No, the mere fact that the Tasaday tools seem to be so simply made and so crude and so irregular by itself doesn't convince me that they are a fake. We have to take into consideration the other sort of evidence.
One problem in assessing the other tool evidence is that there's so little of it. The Tasaday explained that once Tafal had given them knives, they abandoned their stone tools. But where did the stone tools go? If they had been using them for hundreds of years, wouldn't there be at least a few left lying around? None were reported found. But what about the language? The linguistic studies had led to the conclusion that the Tasaday had been isolated for as much as 800 years. Unlike their neighbors, the Tasaday lacked foreign words in their language that would have indicated more recent contact with other cultures. Or did they?
They possess the word Diwata, which is a Sanskrit term for God, divinity. This word could not have entered the Philippines earlier than the 14th century.
I did, in my publication of the 70s, point out that Tasaday have the term Diwata, which means deity or honorific. They use it in only one context, and that is to refer to Manda Elizalde. They don't use it in the context you would expect to use the term deity. That leads me to believe that it may be a recent loanword, and in fact they say that they learned that term from Dafal to refer to Elizalde.
Out of Maloney's 800 Tasaday words, Diwata was the only Sanskrit term. 6 were Chinese-based, and none were from English or Spanish. By comparison, Taboli and Manobo are inundated with traces of foreign words. Could the farmers playing dress-up have fooled Maloney by just avoiding foreign terms? That might have been difficult. Borrowed foreign words gradually get buried in a language, and they can be difficult to identify.
How many English speakers do you suppose know that we find the term the sound je, in English only in French borrowed words, azure, garage in English? That every time there is a je sound, it's a marker that we have a French borrowed word. Very few English speakers know that. Now imagine that you would have the skills to, first of all, exclude them from your speech, and second of all, to never lapse in excluding them. It's simply very implausible.
But since Maloney did her study, the field of linguistics has refined the statistical method used to date separation. The new, more conservative method suggests that Tasaday separated from their Manobo neighbors as recently as 150 years ago. Critics discount the linguistic data, arguing that it describes only a slight difference in dialect, not separation. They say that Tasaday actors were drawn from these people, the Taboli. Certainly the Taboli appear quite different. Their elaborate ceremonies and dress are a long way from life in the caves. And their character appears different as well. Here they are enjoying a favorite pastime, horse fighting. But the biggest difference is that the Tabolis and Manobos are farmers. It would have been easy for them to hide their clothing and pastimes, but pretending to know no agriculture might have been a harder trick. Their songs and speech are full of words that describe what is familiar to them. For instance, they have literally hundreds of terms just for agriculture, types of fields, types of soil, types of crops, like the rice and beans, which are part of their regular diet. In fact, almost all their foods are cultivated. Here is the Tasaday diet, as reported to Doug Yen. No mention of cultivated foods at all. Were they simply lying? Again, Carol Maloney says that if they were, their words would have betrayed them.
The hoax theorists are claiming that these are people from surrounding villages who are called away from their farms to go into masquerade as primitives in the forest and then to return to their fields. This implies that they would have to carefully exclude from their speech, while they were speaking this Tasaday language, all of this rich complex of agricultural terms, including the metaphors that you find in those surrounding languages. Just imagine yourself excluding from your own speech all of those agricultural metaphors. There isn't a grain of truth to that. Sowing the seeds of disruption. I'm going to plow that money back into the firm. Imagine the children sharing in this conspiracy, that they would never slip and never use any of these terms either. It's simply very implausible.
For Doug Yen, this stock from a rice plant was further evidence.
I was very skeptical about the isolation of the Tasaday, especially from the neighbours, the immediate neighbours, who are slash and burn agriculturists. And so there are some opportunities to try them out. One of the best was when I went to Blit and got this. But when I went back, I was surrounded by 2 or 3 or 4 kids, and so I just pulled this out of the pack. And I said, what is this? My usual question, what is this? Their expressions were of absolute surprise. They didn't know what it was. They didn't associate it with the polished rice that they'd been given to eat, which we'd been eating in the camp. They didn't associate with anything. Keep in mind they were children. This one couldn't have been faked. This surprise, this ignorance could not have been faked. It's not conclusive evidence for isolation, but gosh, it's pretty persuasive, don't you think?
What about the caves? Did the Tasaday really live in them? No archaeological dig has ever been attempted to test the claim, but there is this piece of circumstantial evidence. It's a film made in 1974 by the last of the original researchers, Professor Iranius Eibel-Eibelsfeld. Eibel-Eibelsfeld is an ethologist. He studies the minute details of human behavior, sometimes resorting to the use of a specially mirrored camera so that his subjects are less aware they're being filmed. He is convinced that the Tasaday were authentic cave dwellers. He does not believe these children were just pretending. If they were, he says, they were very, very good actors. Today, access to the Tasaday is still limited to those with government approval. One group that did receive permission to visit the tribe came from the local Taboli mission. The fathers at the mission have been following the Tasaday story for over 20 years, and they've had their doubts, as Father Sean McDonough explains.
It would be true to say that we at the Santa Cruz mission thought that the Tasaday was a hoax, mainly because of its association with Mandelizalde. Recently, the Tasaday invited us to go in to see how they lived in caves. And our people now believe what they say about themselves, that they are Tasaday, that they speak a different language, that they have a different way of life. And so we have changed our opinion, yes, in recent times. The Taboli people would say in general that the Tasaday are separate people whom they did not know in the past, that they speak a separate language, that they don't understand that separate language. And therefore they would say, for them, they are not a group of Taboli people masquerading as Tasaday. That's basically what most of the Tabolis that I know have said in the last 18 months since they've begun to meet them.
But if the Tabolis lived so close to the Tasaday caves, how could they have not known about their neighbors? The rainforest could have prevented contact. Once, most of Mindanao Island was covered in virgin rainforest. Farming communities kept well away from it. In the Tasaday area itself, the forest was intact until the 1950s. Then came a huge influx of loggers and immigrants, which pushed the forest back away from the coast. Logging and new settlement continued over the course of the next 10 years, bringing the outside world closer to the caves. If the Tasaday were isolated, the new settlements made their discovery inevitable. Today, the forest is almost gone, and access to the Tasaday area is easier than it has ever been. Still, the Tasaday story remains a perplexing one. Since Oswald Eaton, the Swiss journalist, first declared the Tasaday a hoax, the tribe has made a series of conflicting statements on television. They told NBC they were real.
This is the first time many of the tribe have been inside a house. One said, "What kind of cave is this?"
And they told ABC they were fake.
News Magazine, 2020.
I am absolutely convinced that it was a hoax, and I'm convinced because I believe them.
They've told Philippine television they were real.
Malayan says he is a Tasaday.
And British television, they were fake.
What tribe do they say they belong to?
We are not a separate tribe. We are a mixture of Tiboli and Manobo tribe.
In Manila, there were Senate hearings on the Tasaday. For 2 years, a parade of witnesses testified. Many changed their story or recanted their testimony. One man was accused of impersonating a Tasaday woman in order to falsely claim a hoax. Another witness who claimed hoax was soon killed by police in disputed circumstances. The hearings concluded that Tasaday were authentic, but the judgment seemed to settle nothing. At the Summer Institute of Linguistics in Dallas, Texas, anthropologist Thomas Headland has been puzzling over the story of the Tasaday for the past 3 years. A veteran of more than 20 years fieldwork in the Philippines, Headland's been editing a book that brings together all the Tasaday arguments in one volume. With the book complete, he's now ready with his answer to the riddle of the Tasaday.
Was it a hoax or not? Well, that's a question I'm asked all the time. And most people give me about 17 seconds to answer that. It's complicated, and it's hard to answer shortly, but I'll give it a try. If you mean, was it a hoax? Do you mean were these people paid performers, paid to go in from outside and pose in the rainforest as some kind of primitive Stone Age people? Then I'd say, in that sense, it wasn't a hoax. Now, if you're asking me, were there exaggerations, were there untrue stories told about the Tasaday, then, in that sense, it was a hoax. There were certainly gross exaggerations made about the Tasaday. And one thing that's important to remember is these exaggerations, these false reports, perhaps made unwittingly by journalists, media people, and maybe even scientists that were excited about what they were finding, they exaggerated the stories. But you must remember there were also untrue, incorrect statements made in the 1980s, in my opinion, by people that were claiming that it was a hoax.
Headland believes our understanding of the Tasaday has changed as our own ideas about hunter-gatherers have shifted.
Well, throughout the first half of this century and into part of the second, the idea, certainly in the popular mind and even with anthropologists, was that hunter-gatherers lived a miserable existence, barely able to find their daily food, and it's a wonder they ever survived before they discovered agriculture. Then in 1968, there was a dramatic shift in anthropology looking at hunter-gatherer societies, hunter-gatherer peoples, human foragers. It was decided, based on some evidence, that these people actually lived a very affluent lifestyle, was the term they used. They had enough food. They were able to find plenty of wild foods without even having to work very many hours a week, and were relatively healthy people, too. This idea became very popular at the end of the 60s. Then 2 years when this idea was at its height, this affluent forager idea, the Tasaday were discovered. Here was a group that fit the model perfectly. The Tasaday were described as extremely affluent people. National Geographic said that a man only had to work about 2 hours a day to supply food for his family. That they were in very good health. They were so peaceful and leisure they didn't even have any word for war. And so they described these people as more affluent than they were. I teach my students in my classes before they go to the field, my grad students, about the danger of self-fulfilling hypotheses. Don't go out and come back with the data you hope to come back with. Just let truth lead you wherever it will when you get to the field. Collect your data and bring it back and write it up. This wasn't done in this case.
While the scientific argument continues, life for the Tasaday goes on. Some of the children of 1972 now have children of their own. And while they still don leaves for the occasional film crew that is granted access to their preserve, they seem just as comfortable in Western dress. They have befriended their Manobo neighbors, and intermarriage has increased their number from 21 to 62. They are just beginning to learn agriculture from the Manobo, they say. A new beginning, they call it. And while the Tasaday past may be forever debated, it is possible to construct a kind of likely story that fits the scientific evidence. One plausible history of the Tasaday people.
Okay, we know for a fact that they were originally a part of a Manobo farming community. There were lots of Manobo farmers all over Mindanao. For some reason, they broke off from the larger community. Maybe they were having a feud with their neighbors. Maybe they were fleeing from epidemic diseases. Or most likely, in my view, they were fleeing from slave raiders, because slave raiding was just going on all over the southern Philippines in the latter half of the 19th century. We know that they broke off sometime in the 19th century based on linguistic data. In fact, there were people all over the Philippines that were hiding in the forest from slave raiders in those days. For some reason, this group stayed.
For the Tasaday, perhaps, what began as techniques necessary to survive with only a poor diet and crudely made stone tools slowly became a new way of life. As generations passed, memories of the outside world dimmed. Perhaps by 1971, the descendants really did believe they were the only human beings on the planet. More likely, like many other refuge groups we know about, the Tasaday had occasional contact with outsiders, gathering over the years bits and pieces of the modern world. Far from an idealized image of the remote past, the Tasaday may, in the end, present us with a darker picture of the tangled present.
They adapted to an economic life of hunting and gathering and foraging, and in my view, trading with their farmer neighbors downriver. Then, 1971, along comes Manuel Elizalde and his helicopter. Well, this changed Tasaday life forever.
As the Tasaday enter their third decade of celebrity, it may seem that the end to the controversy about them is in sight. But the main combatants in this strange story remain unconvinced. The argument continues in the same impassioned tone it took on at the 1988 World Congress, when journalist John Nance, who had popularized the Tasaday in the 1970s, found himself face to face with his detractors.
This is the ugliest, the most disgusting, the most disgraceful story that I've ever been involved in. The reason why it took off is I think it was a combination of second-rate science and fifth-rate reporting.
There are no authorities in science. Even the greatest authorities are liable to be questioned about their data.
I mean, you keep saying those things and dismissing this, and you say that after I sit there and listen to Judith Moses, and this gentleman supports her, I mean, what can I do? She says, liable and scandalized me.
This is turning into a circus, and it is not possible to discuss.
After 20 years, any opportunity there might have been for science to study an isolated group is gone. If the Tasaday took to the rainforest to escape the wider world, their days of refuge are over. And the pressure on their small society continues.
Lobo says we are real Tasaday. Yes, there are many people who are disturbing us, telling us we are not Tasaday. We come here to affirm ourselves as real Tasaday. Real Tasaday.
Funding for NOVA is provided by Lockheed, America's aerospace company, supporting math, science, and engineering education for national technology leadership. And Johnson & Johnson, the a signature recognized around the world for commitment to quality healthcare products for the entire family. Major funding for NOVA is provided by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by the financial support of viewers like you.